Joining us now is friend of the show and co-founder of Black Voters Matter, one of the baddest brothers in the fight against this onslaught of white supremacy against democracy. Cliff Albright, how are you this morning, brother?
Hey, man, I'm doing good. I was glad to see you.
Gavin Newsom is a terrible governor. Not saying he's a terrible person, maybe a great person. But look at the state he leads. It's gotten demonstrably, visibly worse by every measure during the years he has led it. You'd think even leaders of the Democratic Party, his party, would be very happy that he could be leaving, but they're not. They're doing everything they can to keep him in office. They're going so far as to endorse the job he's doing, if you can imagine. They're not blind. They see what he's done. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are now set to campaign against the recall. No more democracy for you. You got to wonder, will the state survive this? Will there be a free and fair election? Harmeet Dillon is the co-chair of the Republican National Lawyers Association. California does not get the credit it deserves for the corruption that's endemic there. It's a one-party state, and they act like it.
Of course I'm concerned, Tucker. I'm involved in election integrity efforts throughout the United States, and I'm also a member of the Republican National Committee. We are monitoring things. Just a couple of hours ago, I filed a lawsuit to intervene in a challenge to the constitutionality of the recall statute because, frankly, I don't trust the Secretary of State or the Attorney General. We are going to be jumping on every potential opportunity to do that and fight back against the Democrats. Of course, they are playing fast and loose. We've seen some very alarming scenes of 300 ballots bundled together in the car of a person with a gun and some drugs.
Ballots have already been found in trash cans.
Really?
Photographs have been taken of them. I've got people who have taken videos and said, look what I'm finding here. One pastor I know was driving down the street, saw some documents on the side of the highway that he thought looked somewhat important. He grabbed them. They were opened. He recognized them immediately. They were ballots regarding this special recall election. Every one of those ballots said yes, Newsom should be removed. And the second question on the ballot was, who do you want to replace him with? And these were Larry Elder voters. It's already started. That's why we documented it, because, of course, when you say these things, everybody says, no, that's not true.
We've talked about this on occasion, man. Like, I really would like for you to help contextualize what we see going on in California into the broader into the broader conversation. It's that kind of morning. Into the broader conversation about voting rights and the attacks of the conservatives on voting rights across the country.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically just more of the same, like you were saying. I mean, here you got in that clip, you hear them talking already about, so-called ballots being thrown away and all this evidence of rampant fraud. Like, where have we heard this before, right? Like, these are the same things that Trump said before his election because he knew he was going to lose and because he was trying to set up the big lie. These are the same things that they're doing now in California to cover up the fact they are going to lose this attempt. And no matter what, again, it just reaffirms and strengthens the big lie, because no matter what happens with the actual election, what we know is that they're going to try to use these false claims, these false stories about ballots being thrown out, the same way they're going to use the false stories about the Arizona frauded and checking for bamboo traces within the ballots and all of that stuff. I mean, no matter what, they're going to use the hysteria that they create around the big lie to then be a further rationalization for all of the voter suppression that they're doing all across the country.
I got a pretty hefty task for us this morning. I want us to juxtapose, if you would, voter suppression with COVID-19 and the anti-mask, anti-vax reactionary movement that is also running parallel to the efforts to undermine our right to vote. Help us to draw any parallels that you see between that duality inside of the conservative movement, which is the conspiracy theory that is pushing people to die. Conservative radio hosts, they're believing their lies so much that they are dying from COVID-19, but it's almost like the same lies that they're believing about voting.
Yeah, I mean, like you're right. The Venn diagram of the people that believe in the big lie and the people that are taking ivermectin and talking about vaccination conspiracies. That Venn diagram is a perfect circle, and I'll give you another circle to throw on top of it, because this is something I didn't even know of until I saw some stuff that you and David had tweeted out. So now they got a conspiracy about the doggone hurricane. That the hurricane is a conspiracy, and it's just made up. And you got people attacking newscasters who are out reporting on it, talking about, oh, you better be reporting it right. Stop making up stuff. We're making up a hurricane now? Is that that's and wow. So that circle of the people that believe that fits right on top of those other two circles in terms of COVID and the election fraud. It's crazy. Like what is going on? People are taking horse D-word. Like what is going on here? But this just shows the lengths that you go when you gotta believe in a notion like white supremacy. It'll cause you to believe in just about any conspiracy theory, anything that'll reinforce your belief system, no matter how crazy and unrighteous that belief system is. It'll even to the point of it costing your life. That's how deep this white supremacy is, and it's deeply rooted in the fabric of this country. You're talking about something when white folks had nothing else in this country, when poor white folks had nothing else in this country, they had the notion of at least I ain't them other folk, and that belief when you cling to it, then it'll force you to hold on to it in spite of all reality. It'll force you to believe in notions of white supremacy and inferior white intellect, even when everything we see betrays that notion, right? And so
this supremacy ain't so supreme, brother. This white supremacy ain't so supreme. If you look at the sum total of their equation, the apex, the apotheosis of white supremacy is they're crapping themselves with dewormer.
Right.
I like our odds, brother. I like our odds.
That's right.
David, we want to run this clip. Cliff, you sent over a clip that you want us to take a look at.
I talked a little bit about this earlier today, and I'm gonna be brief with this, but it's really important. I talked about earlier today, if y'all were out there today, about how on this day when most people are talking about I have a dream, that on this day, and not just this day, but really for weeks, my meditations have been on not what Dr. King said in I Have a Dream, but what he wrote a few months earlier when he was sitting in a Birmingham jail.
Yes.
And when he wrote that letter from Birmingham jail, what he did was he did an entire dissertation on the essence and the necessity of nonviolent civil disobedience. And he talked about a lot of things in his letter. And I know many of y'all out here have read it and studied it. But he talked about a lot of things. He talked about this issue of the white moderates. We know a few white moderates nowadays that are getting in the way, right? But he talked about his disappointment in the white moderates. He talked about his disappointment in the clergy, and not just the white clergy, but black clergy as well. But he talked about a lot of things in this letter. He talked about this issue of being an extremist and how people accused him of being an extremist. And his response to them was, that's okay. At first I was offended, but then I reflected and I said, you know what? It's okay to be extreme, because at the end of the day, it wasn't Jesus an extremist for love, right? And so I'm okay with being an extremist if I can be an extremist in the spirit of moving justice and righteousness forward versus being an extremist in the interest of trying to perpetuate injustice. It's not that bad to be extreme. In fact, you got to be extreme, especially if you're going to do what? If you're going to make some good trouble.
Right.
You got to be a little extreme if you're going to make some good trouble. Ain't no way to really make good trouble if you're not willing to be extreme. Right? John Lewis was being extreme when he got on a bus traveling across the South to challenge the laws. You got to be a little extreme to make good trouble. Yeah. You got to be a little extreme.
Now, brother, you better preach. Now, not to take the attention away from the very substance of what you're saying, because it is rich. But brother, you better preach. Hello, somebody. Now, that said, man, I grappled with Dr. King. My father, in his office, when I was a little boy, he had a book of sermons and writings of Dr. King. And man, I was grappling with Yeah. See, wow. That threw me off. That was Cliff's voice, but it was in the video. Coming back to the point of the dialectic that Dr. King espoused in that letter, please talk about this clip, the necessity of what white supremacy would always call anything that we do extreme. But yet we have to do whatever is necessary to make good trouble. Brother Cliff, help us understand what you were feeling in this moment.
Mm-hmm. No, you're,
oh, there you go.
Oh,
there we go. We got you now.
Okay. It's interesting when you talk about your studies of King and being introduced by your father, because when I first moved down to Selma, I moved to Selma in '98. I wouldn't consider myself a. Were you? I didn't know that.
Yeah, okay, I was born in Selma. Yeah, wow. I'm old enough to still have Negro on my birth certificate.
Man, no, you ain't. Get out of here.
I swear, on God. Ask my mama. But go ahead, Cliff. Yours
says black. Mine says black, and I was born like 40 minutes away from you. Look.
Oh my God!
Yeah, 2 years before.
Selma. Look at the difference of Selma. But you moved, Cliff, to Selma in '98.
That's right. And having lived there, I believe you when you say that you've got Negro on your birth certificate.
I do.
But 40 miles from Selma is a significant difference, because you could be in the city of Montgomery in 40 miles from Selma, and there's a difference there. But yes. Anyway, but the point just being that I wasn't really a fan. I wasn't. I was born in the Malcolm school, and truth be told, still am, right. But I developed a deep respect for Dr. King the more that I studied his words, not the words that they would feed us on, his birthday every year and in the McDonald's commercials, where they would just limit it to one speech. But, I started to study the speech when he came out against Vietnam. I started to study his "Where Do We Go From Here" speech in 1967, where he says that, at some point we can't just look at the society and figure out how to better take care of beggars. That's the word he used, was beggars. But we got to question a society that systemically create beggars, right? I started looking at some of his other rights. I started to study the efforts at the Poor People's Campaign. And part of that study was taking a close look at the letter from Birmingham jail, one of the most underrated pieces of writing, I believe, in U.S. history. The way that he spells out the rationale for nonviolent civil disobedience, and he addresses all those issues that I mentioned in there. And so, right now, we're at a moment where we have got to match our actions with the nature of the thing that we are trying to fight against or fight for, right? In other words, when you're fighting against white supremacy, or take a step back, you can't be going after a major opponent in the form of a Goliath, right, and not be willing to use, like Dr. King said, extreme tactics, right? The bigger your opponent is, the more deeply entrenched it is, then the deeper you gotta go. The flip side is also true. If you're just going after a small opponent, you ain't got to go nuclear, right? You gotta match your tactics to the nature of what it is that you're fighting against. Right now, we're fighting against voter suppression, which is as old as America itself. America was founded on voter suppression. Only white men with property, could vote. It was founded on voter suppression. DC, the lack of DC statehood and DC voting rights is as old as the country itself. The filibuster is not a recent creation that's been used against voting rights and civil rights. It's been used against civil rights since 1874 and repeatedly throughout the 1900s to block everything from voting rights to civil rights to anti-lynching legislation. So when you're going up against something that is that deeply rooted in the nature and the fabric of this country and deeply connected to white supremacy, we've got to at least be willing to be as confrontational, as extreme, if you will, as we were in the 50s and 60s with the civil rights movement. It's going to take that level of direct action and civil disobedience. It's going to take being in the streets and locking arms and blocking some doors and blocking some intersections. It's going to take at least that much in order to end this Jim Crow archaic filibuster that is blocking progress for us for so many years, and not just on voting rights. It's blocking progress on all the rest of the agenda that we want to: police violence and climate change and immigration and a living wage. We've got to end this filibuster, but to do so, we've got to be willing to use some tactics beyond the phone calls and the text messages. All that is nice. Social media tweets, all that is good, but we're gonna have to hit these streets a lot harder than what we've been hitting, and it's happening. We've had 4 members of the Congressional Black Caucus get arrested with us over the past month and a half, and so you got Cori Bush, who was willing to be extreme in order to make good trade.
That's right.
Sleeping on the steps of the Capitol is a little extreme, and that's what you got to do when you're trying to save 11 million people from being evicted. That's what we're gonna have to do during the next weeks, as we get into this critical phase of this battle on voting rights, and as we push to end the filibuster.
Yeah.
Cliff, how much time you got, man? Because I get in these conversations and I just be ignoring the clock, and people be like, Ben, I got a call, I gotta get off the show. How much time you got, bro?
Man, I could sit and talk to y'all all day. I'm a little upset Rebecca ain't around, but that's all right.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. Shout out to Rebecca. Nah, man, people be like, we get in these conversations, man, and I honestly, I get so lost in the conversations because they're necessary. Because one of the parts of this, man, that I wanted to ask you about before you got out of here, brother, is that plight of survivors of slavery, and properly being able to understand who we. Because when you say Cori Bush, and you talk about her sleeping on the steps of the Capitol, I actually extrapolate a little higher, and I say I see her sleeping on the steps of the Capitol of the greatest empire in the history of the known universe. And so when we consider our the perspective from that, I don't know, not 30,000 foot perspective, but a universal perspective, what people like Sister Cori Bush and Nina Turner and so many Black people who are deeply steeped in the liberation tradition are doing is galactic, man. Like what you're doing and what you're doing traveling this country, and what John Lewis did, speaking truth to power, all the way back to our ancestors. I'm thinking about Frederick Douglass. I've been hanging around Brother Mac a little bit, so I got a little bit more history in me than Norman Ford. And every time I think about the history of Black folks in this country, man, what kind of nerve we have had to stare the biggest and greatest empire in the history of the known universe in the face and say, let our people go. Talk about that for me, man.
Man, as you were talking, I was thinking about Sister Maya Angelou, and Still I Rise, right? We should not even still be standing. We should not even be in existence. When you think about everything that we've been through, not just the horrors of the Middle Passage, the Maafa, not just the horrors of slavery, of Jim Crow, of the race riots, back when race riots were actually white folks rioting, right, and killing and murdering and plundering and lynching. We shouldn't still be standing when you think about the ways our neighborhoods have been devastated by everything from urban renewal, which they said back in the day was really Negro removal, and when we look at environmental racism, when we look at the healthcare crisis, when we look at all these issues, when we look at how our communities are more susceptible to these natural disasters, as we sit here on the anniversary a couple of days ago of Katrina, and now we're facing another disaster that's plaguing our communities and our loved ones down in Louisiana and Mississippi. We by what nerve, what manner of people are we? We are even still standing, and then having the audacity to continue to shape this country and make it be closer to what it was supposed to be, and having the audacity to exceed in everything from the Olympics and swimming and tennis and sports to business to education to furthering this vaccine itself. How are we even still doing this, right? And so when I look at this battle around voter suppression, and I think about how far we've come, it's you used the word earlier. No, it wasn't paradox, but you used a word earlier.
Dialectic.
The dialectic, right? When we look at the fact that on the one hand, our previous victories on this issue of voting rights, they give us courage to know that there's nothing that we can't overcome, right? That we will get the right. I'm more convinced more than ever. I don't care what anybody says. I don't care what Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema says. I know that we're going to get this voting rights bill. In fact, I made a prediction on somebody's radio show the other day. I said within 30 days, we're going to have the voting rights legislation passed.
Well, we're going to touch and agree on that one, brother. We ain't going to let you out there by yourself. Go ahead.
I believe in that. But the paradox is this. We shouldn't be fighting for something that was supposed to be ours in 1870 with the 15th Amendment. You know, it's highly problematic that amendment wasn't enough. Then we needed a Voting Rights Act of 1965. Then we needed to get that reauthorized every 15, 20, 25 years. And now here we are having a fight for a John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act to restore something that was taken away from that 1965 Act. And we haven't even talked about the fact that same act was then further weakened just a few months ago with the more recent Supreme Court decision in Brnovich. And so here we are right now, we've got less voting rights than we had back in August and September of 1965.
Wow.
Because at least in August, September of 1965, we had the full Voting Rights Act. And here we are, 2021, we've got less protection than what we had in 1965. That's the paradox that we're dealing with.
James.
That we're moving forward and we're gaining victories, but at the same time, at some point, we got to question the fundamental nature of our relationship to this democracy. At some point, we got to get into some deeper questions. Lonnie Guinier tried to have a whole discussion on proportional representation, and that discussion got squashed.
When did that? When did that get squashed? Help me with that history.
Yeah, that discussion back in '92 when when saxophone playing Bill Clinton got elected and was going to nominate was going to nominate. You know, people thought he was black, and then he nominated Lonnie Guinier to be assistant secretary in the Department of Justice, and then he pulled the nomination because people were afraid of Lonnie Guinier's writings on this notion of proportional representation. And we won't go too deep into it right here, but proportional representation challenges the very ways that we even get representation in Congress and in some other bodies. It would do away with the gerrymandering that we're trying to deal with in the For the People Act, but it also it would force us to rethink what Black power and Black representation looks like in this democracy. They didn't want to have that discussion, so they pulled her. He pulled her nomination so that she couldn't. Imagine if she was sitting in Congress being questioned by senators, and there was a real detailed discussion of proportional representation being broadcast on media every day, and introducing this entire country to this notion that they don't want us to know about.
God dog it, Cliff, you nailed that thing down you broke it down to sufficiently where it don't have to be broke no more. Because let me tell you, they do not want the light of any epiphany that there is more and there's better than what America is doing. They don't want that. Proportional representation. You're talking about the reason why we can't get any more than two parties. Diverger's law. We're talking about the very structure and nature of our system when we should have something more analogous to a parliamentarian system. Because can you imagine if Donald Trump had been president at the beginning, or rather if the pandemic had come at the beginning of Donald Trump's presidency, and we're stuck with 4 years with an executive that we can't recall with a snap election, right? They don't want us to have those kind of conversations because it represents fundamental structural reform that would lend power to Black folks. And I think at the end of the day, the fundamental question is, will the Democratic Party, as representatives of this imperialistic order, are they going to engage in good faith with Black people? Or are you at the end of the day telling us that you never really meant for us to actually get power because you're going to use the filibuster as an excuse to keep us from getting it? Brother Cliff, get the last word.
Hey, you hit it right on the head. But at the end of the day, I'll add on to what you just said. Manchin and Sinema, as much as we got to push back against them, there has not been enough discussion around how it's not just them. You got a bunch of other senators that are basically using them as cover, right? And so this ain't just a Manchin Sinema problem. This is a Democratic Senate problem. This is a Democratic White House problem. This is a Democratic party problem. And that's not to excuse the Republicans. I don't people sometimes say, oh, why are you letting the Republicans off the hook? We're not letting them off the hook. We know who they are.
Right.
They too busy with dewormer. Bro, they too busy crapping out their intestines because of this dewormer. We can't talk to them.
That's right.
Cliff,
That's
Cliff,
right.
your podcast, your new podcast, Black Power Revisited. Where can people get the first couple of episodes of that?
Yeah, you can check me out. I got the links on my Twitter. Go to Cliff_notes, and you can get the links there. You can go to the link tree there. You go to my website, CliffAlbright.com, and you can get the links to the podcast as well as some videos and the video that you were just showing and some other videos as well. And so go to CliffAlbright.com. Check me out on Twitter, Cliff_notes, and you can check out the podcast, which will soon be featuring none other than Benjamin Dixon.
Yes, indeed.
And that's why I like the podcast format, because we could just run on and on and on and on as long as our heart's content. But we're out of time this morning, and thank you, brother, for being willing to come here, because you stay on those streets and you're causing good trouble, man. So we want to continue to support you in any way we can. Brother Cliff Albright, co-founder of Black Voters Matter.